President Trump just announced a trade deal with the EU, and the US and China have also agreed to pause their tariffs for another 90 days. In the meantime, Bitcoin continues to trickle on up since getting a nice bounce from the range lows. In today's video, we'll be talking about all of this, but we'll also be going over what you want to look at if you're looking into altcoins. If you enjoy the content, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Let's jump right into the video. As per usual, let's kick us off with the Bitcoin price action. What you can see here is that we got that bounce from the lows, which we talked about in yesterday's video. And just to quickly go over it, in case some of you missed what we talked about on the channel. When Bitcoin was coming lower and lower and lower, a lot of people started to freak out, thinking that we wouldn't get any kind of bounce and this would be over. This was distribution, we were getting altcoin season, and it was time for Bitcoin to start dumping. However, this was a key confluence level on the chart. First of all, it was the range low of this bull flag that you can see, but also it coincided with the CME gap, and it also coincided with the daily fair value gap. As you can see here, the daily fair value gap was all the way down into this level, right in this green box, and also we had the CME gap. Now, some of you have already started saying that we will likely go lower into the CME gap before we get the significant bounce that everyone is waiting for. However, if you follow the history of the CME gaps, you know that sometimes we do get front run ever so slightly. But in this case, we did just tap into it, as you can see by this wick, by a few dollars that is. Now back to the Bitcoin chart. What I was really looking at here was to pile into my longs right at this range low. And if you're in my premium group, you know that this is exactly what we did. Now, what comes next for Bitcoin? Because you can see that we continue to pop out of this range. However, we seem to fail making lower highs. And what I mean by this is on the 4-hour time frame, if I zoom in here, you can see that the first high was here around $123,000. Then we have that second high, which is just below 121K. Then we have the third high, which is right around 120K. Another one around here, which is around 119.5K. And then just now, before I recorded this video, going into the weekly close, we had another lower high right around 119.4K. As I'm recording this video, we are sitting right at $118,600. So what comes next for Bitcoin? The base case still remains the same. While I do think we will go higher, if Bitcoin continues to bore the hell out of us and we just continue to chop around, altcoins will continue to outperform Bitcoin. However, when we have the breakout and we make a new all-time high past $123,000, which is still my base case, that is when we will see Bitcoin dominance, which we've been covering on the channel at length, go up. You can see that this green candle has since retraced quite a bit. Altcoins continue to show a little bit of outperformance against Bitcoin. Now, are we going to break down from here and is this going to be the true altcoin season? My base case is still no. And honestly, it would benefit everyone if Bitcoin decides to break out, to rip much, much higher. Then Bitcoin dominance pumps as Bitcoin leads the way. And then, and only then, when Bitcoin starts to consolidate at much higher valuations, that is when we get the true altcoin season. I will keep repeating myself on this topic because I know that a lot of you are worried about not getting good entries into altcoins if you have a Bitcoin stack. Now, if you don't have a Bitcoin stack, which I know that there's another portion of you that don't, and you want to just get the best possible entries on US dollar valuations, well, it still is worthwhile to look at both Bitcoin and Ethereum, because if your altcoin isn't outperforming Ethereum, then it makes more sense to just hold ETH if you want to be a stress-free investor. Now, in today's video, we'll also be talking about how you can identify opportunities in the altcoin market, technical analysis paired with fundamentals. So make sure you watch the entire video so you get some of that alpha. But right now, Bitcoin is still chopping around within this range, and we haven't been able to make a new high. But my current target for this Bitcoin long is around the all-time highs. I will likely be shaving some profits as we surpass 120K, but ultimately I do think that we will be putting in a brand new all-time high for Bitcoin. This is not the end. And just before I move on to the next charts, the downside here would be if Bitcoin ends up breaking and confirming below $112,000, at that point, we have to start re-looking at this previous range that Bitcoin was in. But right now, so far so good. And you can see that if I really zoom out on the Bitcoin chart, we have had a very nice expansive move, and on the weekly time frame, we are holding this upper trend line as support, which suggests further upside. This is a pretty solid weekly candle for Bitcoin after printing this red one, which a lot of people were worried about. Now let's see what this next week has to offer, but a lot of people were freaking out as Bitcoin tapped into the fair value gap, into the CME gap, and to the bottom of the range, which we've been covering on the channel. We just added to our longs. We're gonna wait, be patient, see how it plays out. If Bitcoin continues a little bit lower into this fair value gap, I would likely be adding even more to my long positions as everyone freaks out and thinks that the market is over. So let's see what happens. It also depends on the reaction. Let's move on to some altcoins because we can see here that the total crypto market cap, excluding the top 10, is actually getting a little bit of a better candle since the start of the week because we had a massive dump all the way down to just below 275 billion. And now that dump has been eaten up and you can see that this is barely a red candle on the weekly, sitting right around $300 billion. Now, altcoins, here's what I want to talk about. First of all, we do have ETH against Bitcoin, which we've been covering on the channel at length. Now you can see that we did get some dump this week, but it got eaten up and now ETH continues to outperform Bitcoin, which was our base case since we hit the lows all the way down here. Now, just to be perfectly clear, I have Ethereum in my portfolio and I also have Bitcoin in my portfolio while I am also trading shitcoins on the side. Now, if you like trading the crypto market with leverage and you're not just a spot holder, make sure to join me in my free Telegram community, which is the first link in my description down below. You can join there and then you'll see a message to be able to join my free premium group. Just message me the word premium and I would be happy to onboard you. Now let's take a look at alts and some examples that I would be looking for. First of all, ETH Bitcoin looks great. I think we're going to continue to move higher even if this chart comes back a little bit lower. I would see it as an excellent longing opportunity because there is so much room for upside here. And as you know, as Ethereum continues to outperform Bitcoin, that is when altcoins can have some stronger performance. Now, I still think that ETH will be leading the way, and this is why I always recommend to measure your altcoins against Ethereum. If Ethereum is outperforming your favorite altcoin, then I would still recommend staying in ETH. The reason being, Ethereum being the blue chip crypto that it is, gives you better risk-adjusted returns compared to most altcoins. So make sure that if you're holding a ton of different altcoins, they're at the very least outperforming Ethereum. Now, with Bitcoin dominance having the weekly candle that it just did, a little bit of uncertainty, let's take a look at some altcoins. First of all, I want to take a look at the ICP chart. The reason I'm bringing this up is to spot potential opportunities in terms of trade setups and to help you identify what you should be looking for in terms of altcoins. Now, I will start by saying, first of all, make sure your altcoin has a chance to outperform Bitcoin. Second of all, make sure that it's outperforming Ethereum. Now, if you meet that criteria, perfectly fine, you can move on to the next step, which is looking at the altcoin chart. The reason I'm bringing this up is because this is a potential strong altcoin chart where you see the bottoming formation. Now, a lot of you may be looking at this chart and think, look at this massive dump. Why on earth would I look to put my money into that altcoin? Well, you don't want to go after the altcoins that already pumped. And so when you look at these bottoming formations, what do you see? These zones are heavy accumulation zones and they are strict lows on the altcoins. What this means is your invalidation for any kind of trade on this altcoin would be below these lows because you can see we set a very, 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 very strong bottom down here. And so this would suggest that if we do get the altcoin season that everyone is waiting for, we could see a pretty significant pump on coins like these that have bottomed out on their USD valuation. Now, ICP is not the kind of coin that has been outperforming Bitcoin by any means. In fact, it's just been bleeding against Bitcoin. But this is the kind of chart that you want to look at if you're looking in altcoins. Have they been bottoming out and did they not pump already? The next one I want to show you here, just as an example, would be Near Protocol. I know a lot of people have talked about this project. It used to be massive. Everyone was speculating on it when it was all the way up here in the $8 range, and also in the previous cycle, it went all the way up to $20. Again, what do you see on this chart? A pretty significant downtrend from cycle to cycle. However, if we look a little bit closer, you can see that we're forming a little bit of a bottoming out zone here which could act as very, very strong support for this token. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to go ahead and pump immediately, but what it does mean is if you wanted to trade a token like this, your invalidation would be below the range lows with a strong potential upside, marking all the way up to at the bare minimum $9 as the target. Now, I wouldn't recommend entering any kind of altcoins like this with leverage because you just never know. It could chop around in this range for a while, but this is the kind of thing that you want to look at if you're trading altcoins. Now, just to give you a quick look at the risk to reward, let's say we were to enter today and your stop would be slightly below the lows here with the potential upside around $8, around $9, then you can see that your risk to reward on this trade is around 3.58. So obviously this depends on your time horizon, but this is what you want to look at. Are they starting to form that bottom and have they not quite pumped yet? Near is one example and ICP is another example. Also, just to be perfectly clear, it doesn't mean that these tokens have to pump because the next step of this process is to actually look at the fundamentals. Do you actually believe in this project and the value that it's trying to bring to the world? Will they fulfill on their promises? Do they have a strong cult-like community? Are they active across all social media platforms? Are they constantly updating us on their new developments? That is what you want to look for in terms of fundamentals. Just because a chart like this is bottoming out, it doesn't automatically mean that it's just going to have a massive pump. But this is what I would be looking for if I wanted to get my hands into altcoins. Now, also, another example here that we saw was, of course, XRP. We had a massive pump, and so despite how bullish you might be on XRP this cycle, I wouldn't be accumulating XRP at these levels. I mean, we're right at the all-time highs. This is not a solid risk to reward trade, in my opinion, after getting that massive pump. Now, something else that you want to look for to be able to predict these kinds of moves along with the fundamental analysis is taking a look at your altcoin against Bitcoin. As you can see here, this is the weekly time frame for XRP against Bitcoin. We formed a very nice double bottom, suggesting that XRP could have some stronger performance compared to Bitcoin, which is where I would want to put my money. When you see a chart like this, it could suggest that we have a massive pump against Bitcoin. So the key takeaways here: measure your altcoin against Bitcoin, try to see if it's forming a double bottom, measure your altcoin against Ethereum to make sure that you're at least going to get better risk-adjusted returns. And of course, if you look at its dollar valuation, is it forming a bit of a bottoming out chart? Has it not already pumped? And does it still have strong fundamentals? At that point in time, it makes for a strong risk to reward. And that is where I would consider entering these kinds of altcoin trades for some potential spot holding. Now, ultimately, you know how I've been operating in this market. I hold Bitcoin and I also hold Ethereum because I think that Ethereum will give me most of the gains in the altcoin market while living my life relatively stress-free. However, if you're very, very eager to get into altcoins and you're willing to hold on to them before they get some kinds of pumps, this is what I would be looking at. Don't chase altcoins that have already pumped massively. And there's so many examples of charts like these where we're seeing a little bit of a bottoming formation, maybe even sometimes a double bottom, and this just means that these altcoins are poised to break out if the fundamentals are right and they're capturing the right kind of narratives in this crypto market. And if you want to trade any of these cryptocurrencies, remember you have the links in the description down below. The second link brings you directly to Bluffin. I have a fantastic promotion for you. There is still some room available where you can earn $1,000 simply for making a deposit into Bluffin and of course executing some very small trades. You have that second link in the description down below if you want to know all the details. As you can see here, all of the rules are down below. We also have weeks where you can earn a $400 bonus. That is the third link in my description down below. And as you can see here, weeks is actually where I have my $9,000 in profit Bitcoin trade at the moment as we entered from those lows around the CME gap, around the fair value gap, and of course at the bottom of this range, which I shared within my free Telegram community, which is the first link in my description down below as well. So let's get back to the charts. So you can see we're looking for these double bottoms on altcoins, not just on their US dollar valuation as they're forming that bottoming out formation, but also we're looking for the potential where they can outperform both Bitcoin and Ethereum. Next up here on the Bitcoin chart, you can see that we're just trying to hold this level as support before we can break up. But right now we cannot ignore this price action. We are still seeing some lower highs. I want to confirm a breakout above 119.6K and then a confirmed breakout above 120K. And then finally, this could be suggesting that we're going to be targeting the all-time highs, which is indeed my base case. But what I really like about this at the current moment is the fact that we've been holding on to this point of control of the range, which you can see we had the most volume on these levels. So the 4-hour chart does look very, very solid, holding on to these levels. Now, can we finally get a massive pump sending us to new all-time highs with Bitcoin dominance moving up, and then we can finally have a proper altcoin season? And speaking of alts, I do want to show you the social risk. You can see that we got a little bit of an uptick since tagging this zero low. So we are currently at 0.1, which is essentially the overall attention across social media for crypto influencers, for exchanges, for layer ones, etc. So when this pumps massively, that is when we have a true altcoin season, or I should say that is when we are already in a true altcoin season. Right now, we are just below 0.1. So I'm going to keep paying attention to this chart because it does tell me as things start to pick up in the altcoin market, especially if I'm going to start transitioning some of my Bitcoin into altcoins, which I'll remind you, I've only shifted it into Ethereum and not quite into the rest of the altcoin market yet. I'm still waiting for a big Bitcoin breakout. Then, next thing I wanted to show you, so the US and China agreed to extend tariff pause by another 90 days. The market obviously pumped to this news with this low liquidity Sunday, and President Trump says the US officially reached a trade deal with the EU. Now, what are the details of this trade deal? Agreement to open up trade at 0% tariff, EU to buy up to $750 billion of US energy, EU to purchase vast amounts of US auto, tariffs on automobiles reduced to 15%. Trump calls this the biggest deal ever reached. And to wrap up this video, the key events of this upcoming week, obviously we have FOMC, so it should be a pretty exciting week. CB consumer data, Tuesday. June JOLTS job opening data, Tuesday. Q2 2025 GDP data on Wednesday, and then we have the Fed meeting and interest rate decision on Wednesday. The expectation is still that they will not be cutting rates, despite the fact that Trump keeps on being adamant that rate cuts are what's best. Then we also have the June PCE inflation data on Thursday and the July jobs report on Friday. Another massive week ahead of us. Keep your eyes on Bitcoin, keep your eyes on this chart because now it looks like we're trying to hold this level as support. Hopefully we can get that pump this week, but until we break out of this range, ultimately altcoins can still outperform. It's only when we get the breakout to the upside or to the downside that Bitcoin dominance will likely be increasing. And that sums up today's quick video. I hope you enjoyed a little bit of a different style of content where we take a look at altcoins bottoming out against Bitcoin, but also on their US dollar valuation, which they haven't already pumped. Now, I'm not saying, once again, that those altcoins are the ones that you should be just piling your money into. You want to look at the strong fundamentals as well, paired up with the TA to have a look at the best risk to reward opportunities. That is how I would be trading the altcoin market. Until then, my spot positions are still in Bitcoin and Ethereum, and if you're part of my premium group, you also know that I like to trade these altcoins with leverage. That sums up today's video. We have FOMC, should be a huge week. I will make sure to keep you updated as things develop. If you enjoy the content, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in tomorrow's video.